Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Justin the Food Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm Justin Bizzarro. I'm your host. That's B as in boy, IZZARRO. And you can find us on social media at Justin the Food Entrepreneurs on both Facebook and Instagram. Today, we'll be interviewing Xocolatl of Atlanta, Georgia. Matt Wyan and his wife, Elaine Reed, are the owners. How are you doing today, Matt?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. So, Matt, tell us a little bit about your and your wife's background and what led you up to owning your own chocolate company.
Well, our backgrounds didn't have anything to do with food or entrepreneurship. We both had careers prior to starting the business together for about 10 or 12 years. I was working in progressive politics, and Elaine was doing nonprofit work with international aid and relief organizations primarily. And we got to a place where we were both a little burned out on our work, and we were trying to figure out, what we wanted to do with ourselves. And we had our son was already about 3 years old, and she was pregnant with our second child, and we decided we were just going to kind of make a change and take a break. And we had a little bit of saved up, but not a lot, and we decided we would just kind of roll the dice and go down to Costa Rica for some indeterminate amount of time. We had when we were younger, done some traveling together and separately before we met, and we kind of liked the idea of sort of going down and having. We sort of figured we could do at least 6 months down in Costa Rica and kind of have some family time and kind of try to think about, what we wanted to do with ourselves. And we thought, maybe we'd figure out some way to stay in Costa Rica longer. And so we waited actually until our daughter was born, and then we started putting things in motion to get ready for this. And then when she was about 3 or 4 months old, we all went down to a little town on the Caribbean side of Costa Rica on the coast, Puerto Viejo, a place where Elaine and I had been probably 10 years before, had kind of gone through. And we rented a little house kind of in the jungle there and sort of set up shop. And while we were down there, we were on a really small budget, and we would go into town to the little farmer's market there. We'd go in on the weekends and get our food. And the one thing we started, it was sort of our little treat for ourselves, was we'd buy these little chocolate bars that were made by folks who were growing cacao and then processing it all the way to making the chocolate themselves. And these are little small 20-gram chocolate bars, but it was chocolate kind of unlike any chocolate we'd had before. It was just made with cacao and organic cane sugar. There was nothing else added to it, no added cocoa butter or soy lecithins or other kind of fillers. And it was really different. It was really good, and it was it was sort of our treat for ourselves. After we get the kids to bed, we'd be in a hammock and we'd share a little chocolate bar together, and kind of fell in love with it. And then we started learning more about the process of how chocolate was made, where it came from. But at the time we went down, I didn't even know that chocolate comes from the cacao tree and comes from this fruit, and the whole process of how the seeds are turned into something that can be processed into chocolate. And started learning that process from the folks down there that were making it. And at some point, we realized we weren't going to be able to stay in Costa Rica forever, but this light bulb went off. Well, hey, we can bring this back to Atlanta and try to build a business around this. And so that was kind of the start of everything. But up until that point, as I said, we did not, come from entrepreneurial families or have experience with that or in food really. So that's kind of where we started.
And so when you guys came back from Costa Rica, you jumped right into this endeavor. So like this is something we need to bring back to the United States. This is something that we can really find success with in Atlanta. I mean, how did you come up with the decision to do it? I mean, because you have your own shop now, you're obviously producing quite a bit of chocolate for people, and it's doing well. So, I mean, tell us a little bit about the conversation you and your wife had, or how you guys decided you were going to, I mean, because it's not a small endeavor.
Sure. Well, as I said, we didn't come from entrepreneurial families, but we're both pretty risk tolerant, and also when we sort of, I think, kind of make a decision, we sort of go all in on it, and so that's kind of what happened with us just going down to Costa Rica in the first place. That was sort of a kind of off the wall decision, but kind of once we decided we wanted to do it, we started sort of putting everything in place to do that. And so, when we were down there, we realized this was something we wanted to do. While we were still down there, we started, started researching it. We saw that this bean to bar chocolate movement was growing already in the United States. I mean, this was 2013 when we were down in Costa Rica, and there were already some bean to bar chocolate companies that had been around for, a couple of them that had been around for almost a decade at that point, but it was growing, and there were more and more of them popping up. And so, we live right downtown Atlanta, and in the area which was experiencing a lot of redevelopment. And just around the corner from us, we knew that there was this, when we left, there was a old warehouse that was being converted into a food hall. And so we kind of, all the gears started turning, and we thought, well, we could bring this back and kind of create this little micro factory in this food hall. Because one of the things we really liked about the bean to bar chocolate itself and the whole sort of movement was that it was bringing a lot of transparency to chocolate, and to, most people, I think, you ask the average American, where does chocolate come from? It's like, it comes from a factory. No one really, not a lot of people really know the history of it, what it is, or much about this food that we consume all the time. And so we wanted to kind of show people chocolate comes from a tree, that explain the process, and then actually people be able to actually see us making chocolate from the bean all the way to finished chocolate bars in our little micro factory. And we sort of felt like, as we did research, we kind of saw other places in the States were starting to do this, and we felt like we could start there. I mean, the idea was we would start with a little kind of public micro factory and start doing retail first, and that as we grew, we could hopefully eventually one day have a factory, because our place at Krog Street Market is only about, our entire space is 400 square feet, but our production space is only about 200 or so square feet, and we're now making probably more than 10 tons of chocolate a year out of that 200 square feet. So we're sort of running up against our capacity there, and so that was kind of our starting point, and so we actually kind of from the jungle of Costa Rica, we got on Skype and called the broker for the Krog Street Market as they were still under development, and basically completely BS them that we were this chocolate company. We were down in Costa Rica sourcing cacao. We sounded like we knew what we were doing, and we wanted to. This was our concept, and they didn't really vet us at all. So we sort of were faking it until we made it, and were able to sign on in the food hall. We really felt like that was a good location for us. It was going to have high foot traffic. There were going to be a lot of other well-known chefs in Atlanta and kind of foodies going there. We wanted to really bring this kind of concept of an elevated chocolate to Atlanta, and we kind of felt like that was the right location for it.
Yeah, I love that, actually. And just so the audience knows, you made a comment about bean to bar market and what's going on there in that trend. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So, bean to bar, I guess just to start from the beginning, what we do is we make chocolate from cacao beans. So we import cacao from Central and South America, from East Africa, and we roast the beans, we crack them, we stone grind them, and it's a process that once we get the beans, takes about a week to go from a raw bean to a finished chocolate bar. And just to go back even beyond that, chocolate comes from the cacao tree, and so it's a fruit. It grows in these. The tree produces these big, really colorful, pretty pods, and inside the pods are cacao seeds that are covered in a fruit pulp. And what we call cocoa beans are actually the seeds of this fruit. And so what happens is, farmers will harvest the pods, they'll crack open and pull out the pulp and the seeds. The seeds then get fermented in their own fruit pulp, and so and farmers will collect a bunch of this together and ferment in big boxes together, and then that process usually takes 5 to 7 or 8 days, and then the fermented, we'll then call them beans, get laid out on drying beds similar to like coffee, and will dry over the course of another 10 to 12 days, usually, depending on the weather. And then at that point, you've got raw cocoa beans that are ready for processing. So the bean to bar movement in the States is, as I said, when we started in 2013, I'm not sure how many bean to bar makers there were. I think it was still probably under 100, but it was growing pretty quickly. I mean, I'd say we were in sort of maybe the second or third wave of makers that were popping up, and now I think it's over 200 or so. But there's, historically, people think of kind of European chocolate as kind of the fine chocolate, and I think that what's happening is very similar to what's happened with beer over the last 20 or so years, where in the 80s or early 90s, U.S. wasn't really known for its beer, and kind of the best beers were considered to come from Europe. And then we sort of, in the U.S., kind of had this microbrewery explosion, and then European makers actually started, and around the world, people started actually looking at the U.S. as producing some of the best beers around. I think the same thing is actually happening in chocolate right now. That people talk about Swiss chocolate and these European chocolate, but there's no cacao that grows in Europe. It only grows within 20 degrees of the equator. And so, so it's just, the American small batch chocolate makers, bean to bar chocolate makers, are kind of going back and really focusing on buying kind of the best quality beans in the same way that coffee, this kind of third wave coffee over the last 10 or 15 years has really improved the quality of coffee in the U.S. Similar thing is happening now in chocolate. We're looking for the best beans we can find, and then we're processing them. We're doing small batches, and we're really paying a lot of attention to the roast profiles and to in the way that we make chocolate. We don't add anything so we have a line of single origin bars that are just cacao and organic cane sugar, and we don't add anything else to the bar. So a lot of industrial chocolate, they're going to be adding definitely additional cocoa butter, some kind of lecithin, usually like a soy lecithin, and a lot of times adding even other vegetable fats and things to the bars. And so our single origin lineup of bars, it's from 70% cacao all the way up to, actually we have a 100% cacao bar, is made with beans just from one origin, and then adding just organic cane sugar, except for the case of our 100% bar, which is just pure cacao from Nicaragua. So that's kind of what the bean to bar movement in the U.S. is doing, and now we're starting to see that actually other countries are starting to pick up this kind of small batch bean to bar process is actually now spreading to Europe and to Asia and to other places, but kind of originated in the States over the last 20 years, but really kind of taking off in the last 10 years.
And so actually, is it a tree that the cocoa? See, this is where you said most Americans don't know where it comes from, and being in food as long as I have, we don't mess with chocolate of any sorts. So, do the trees are they trees?
Yeah, they are trees. They're really, I mean, I would encourage folks to go and Google cacao tree images because they're really interesting looking trees. They The pods are about, they vary in size, but they're kind of oblong. They're different shapes depending on the varieties, but they're some kind of pointy tips, and they're really pretty colors. They'll range from, usually they'll start off as green, and then as they ripen, they'll turn into yellows or purples or even kind of blues. I mean, there's a real rainbow of colors that the pods turn into, and they'll grow both from kind of the branches, how you would think of as like a fruit tree, but they'll also just grow right off of the trunk of the tree as well. And so the tree produces thousands of these really pretty little flowers, and then only about 5% of them actually will develop then into pods. And, it takes harvesting a bunch of pods to take the seeds and the pulp out. And usually what the places that we work with are usually co-ops of farmers because, farmers aren't, as an individual farmers, not able to produce and be able to export, a container load of cacao. And so they'll typically bring the wet pulp and seeds to a central fermentary that the co-op is running. They'll all kind of put their, it's called in baba. Baba is the term usually used for like wet beans, the pulp around the beans. And so they'll bring that all to the central fermentary, put it in these big wood boxes where the seeds ferment, the beans ferment together in their own pulp. And so the sugars from the pulp are what the bacteria are feeding off of that kind of jump starts the whole fermentation process. And so as these the pulp and beans are in the boxes, the ferment starts up. They'll heat up to about 48 degrees Celsius over the course of a couple days. Every day or so, the beans will be turned over, maybe from one box to another, just so that they mix and the fermentation kind of happens evenly and you don't get like a really hot ferment in the middle of the box, but not getting as much ferment on the outside of the box. And so then after about as I said, about 5 to 7 or 8 days, you get a complete ferment, and then they start the process of drying the beans from that point.
It's an incredible thing. I mean, it's just, you don't think about how much of labor and things and time goes into the farming process before you even get the bean, and let alone before it's even produced into chocolate. So the trees can only grow in warm climates. I mean, I believe you said East Africa as well as Central and South America. So those are the only places that the cacao tree can grow?
Well, it grows within 20 degrees of the equator almost all over the world. And so the vast majority of cocoa in the world comes from West Africa, Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana is where most of the chocolate you probably had as a kid, the stuff that's in Hershey's and kind of industrial chocolate is almost all coming out of West Africa. There's different varieties of cacao, and the cacao that's grown in West Africa is typically not considered to be a fine flavor variety. And then a lot of it also has to do with the ferment, and the drying is really important to the finished flavor of the cacao. And so a lot of times in industrial chocolate, sometimes they're buying beans that haven't even been fermented, which is kind of dried, or that's really bad ferments done. But for industrial chocolate, they don't really care so much because it's similar to sort of industrial coffee. They'll roast the beans at high temperatures and put a bunch of milk and sugar and other stuff into the chocolate, and it doesn't really matter so much the quality of the bean. And so that's kind of the history of what's happened with chocolate over the last 100 years. And then in the bean to bar movement's really going back in a similar way of what has happened with coffee over the last 20 years, and saying, we want to spend a lot of time finding the best beans and also working directly with the farmers. There's a lot of emphasis placed on ensuring that equity kind of through the supply chain. So farmers in West Africa who are selling to industrial makers, they're usually selling through like 3 or 4 middlemen, and they're really making next to nothing for their labor. And there's a lot of attention in the bean to bar world on making sure that there is kind of equity through the supply chain. We travel down to origin, and we've been working especially in Peru with a co-op of farmers down there for the past 4 or 5 years, and are focused on trying to get to a place where all of our beans are coming through direct trade. We're paying fair trade or above fair trade prices for all the beans that we get, but we want to be buying directly from farmers whenever we can. And so we've been working with a co-op down there, and we go down and meet with them during the harvest and kind of are there as that's happening, and then negotiating contracts directly with them. And we're going down with a group of 3 or 4 other chocolate makers, because in the same way that the farmers are too small to be able to kind of export on their own, we're we're doing, as I said, about 10 or 12 tons of chocolate a year. We're still too small to really buy a container load of cacao on our own. And so the one thing that's really been nice about the bean to bar chocolate community in the U.S. is it's very collaborative. It's not competitive. We all kind of feel like a rising tide with small boats. And so folks are willing to work together, and we travel together and buy beans together and ship them into the U.S. And then once they get here, we'll kind of ship them to each of our little factories. So that's sort of where, it's a process, I think, that we're all, focused on, improving the supply of both fine quality cacao to chocolate makers in the U.S., but also ensuring that, more attention is put on the work the farmers do. I think telling the story of how these beans get to a place that can actually be made into chocolate is really important, because, like you said, most people don't know the amount of labor that goes into it on the farm side, and then also making sure that we're able to pay a fair price for the cacao that we're buying.
And so, I mean, are you literally then getting container loads through, I don't know, Port of Savannah, for example, since you guys are in Georgia, of the beans?
Yeah, we actually, most of our, the beans we buy actually go through New Jersey right now, because like I said, we're buying with other makers, and so they'll go into New York, New Jersey. There's another bean to bar chocolate maker, Rocca Chocolate, which is actually really interesting. They're based in Brooklyn, and they're actually really interesting. They don't roast their cacao before they make it into chocolate, and so it has a really unique flavor. And that you can find them in a lot of Whole Foods around the country. They're very kind of wholesale business, focused business. And so we'll buy beans with Rocca. French Broad Chocolate is up in Asheville. And Dan and JL, the owners of French Broad Chocolate, are just amazing people. And they actually, we didn't know this at the time, but they lived in the same little town in Puerto Viejo in Costa Rica that we did about 7 years before us. And they had set up a little restaurant there called Bread and Chocolate, and which is still in existence. So you go to Puerto Viejo, you can go to Bread and Chocolate, and they sold it to a friend before they left Costa Rica and moved back up to Asheville. And they've been really supportive and taught us a lot, and we buy beans with them. And then Parliament Chocolate out in California as well, in Redlands, California. And so typically the container load will leave from Peru, or sometimes actually go by land up to Colombia, and then leave from there and go to New Jersey, and then we'll kind of ship down to us in Atlanta. We buy beans from Nicaragua as well. We have beans from Ecuador, beans from Madagascar. We've had beans from Vietnam, from Trinidad, and a couple of Bolivia as well. And so we're always kind of, we want to establish long-term relationships with the farmers that we work with, but we also are occasionally do limited edition bars because we like the idea of introducing a new bean. And I think one of the things I guess I haven't mentioned yet is that the thing that's interesting about doing this kind of single origin chocolate is that, similar to coffee, beans from different regions that are either different varieties or have different growing climates or were fermented differently will have different flavors. So our Madagascar single origin chocolate is a really fruity, bright chocolate. The cacao from Ecuador doesn't have a lot of fruit notes. It's a much more kind of cocoa-y, kind of s'mores-like kind of chocolate flavor. So you get these really interesting differences in chocolate just from the bean itself, when we don't mess with it, when we just do with cacao and organic cane sugar. And we also do a line of flavor inclusions. We have a coconut milk dark chocolate, and we do almond and sea salt, and we have some coffee bar and other flavors. But kind of the thing that we first fell in love with was this idea of these single origin bars that really have these unique flavors just based on the origin of the bean.
And so on that topic, can you tell the audience what's your website and where can they find you on social media?
Sure. Our website is xocolatlchocolate.com, and Xocolatl is spelled Xocolatl. So it's Xocolatl chocolate.com. And I think our Instagram is the same. Our Facebook is maybe Xocolatl Small Batch Chocolate. And so you can find us there. We when we started at Krog Street Market, Elaine and I were the only chocolate makers, and we were working until 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning, making chocolate and hand wrapping chocolate bars, and we were just kind of making enough chocolate to sell out of the shop. And over the last 4 years, we've been able to get some additional help. And so we're now, we've got the online store, and we started to do wholesale about 2 years ago. And so you can also find us in we're in a bunch of states now, and kind of mostly small boutique shops, and kind of all over the country. And but we're also here in Georgia in fresh markets around the state here in Georgia, and just started in some of the Whole Foods here in Georgia as well. But we're really looking to expand our production capabilities so that we can kind of continue to grow our wholesale market over the next couple of years.
And so tell us some of the varieties of the bars, and you mentioned some of the specialty bars you've done. Tell us about some of those as well. So if I go online, what type of bars do you guys have? What flavor profiles? And you mentioned like the single origin bars. So obviously you probably can't remember all of them, but maybe you can if you're involved in it every day. I don't know. It's hard for me to remember everything we produce, but some people can.
Sure. So, we have the lineup of single origin bars, which are all dark chocolate. They're, range from 70% dark chocolate up to an 85%, and then even 100%. And then we have a line of our flavor inclusions, which are really also lean on the dark chocolate side. We have our most popular bar is called Kiss Mermaids, and it's a 60% dark coconut milk chocolate with vanilla-infused sea salt and cacao nibs sprinkled on the back of the bar. We have our Go Nuts bar, which is a 68% Peruvian dark chocolate with roasted almonds and then vanilla-infused sea salt. We've got Commuter bar, which is a bar that we did with a local coffee roaster here in Atlanta. It's a 60% dark coconut milk with coffee from Pole Coffee here in Atlanta. And we actually won a Good Food Awards in 2017 for our single origin Peruvian bar that was a 70% bar. And then last year we won another Good Food Awards for our Ripple Effect bar, which is a 60% dark chocolate with blood orange infused olive oil, raspberries ground into the chocolate, and then smoked cacao nibs, applewood smoked cacao nibs sprinkled on the back with some raspberries as well. And that was a bar that, and it came out of a collaboration that we were doing with a local brewery here in Atlanta. Wild Heaven Brewing had used some of our nibs and smoked them and used them in this Russian Imperial Stout that they made with a bunch of raspberries. So we kind of took that concept and tried to sort of work it back into a chocolate bar. And we were going to do it as kind of a limited edition, but we ended up winning the Good Food Award for it. So then we decided we'd just keep it as a regular rotation. And we've got, we got several other bars as well. We do one we call Soul Rebel, which is a dark coconut milk chocolate with Jamaican jerk spices. So it's got some, and it's really kind of interesting, kind of savory chocolate bar. It's some people, you kind of either love it or hate it. And I like it. It's actually a good chocolate bar to have with like a cold beer, which is not always the case with chocolate. So, and you can see the full lineup of our bars on our website, on our online store there.
And so what is your favorite bar?
It varies kind of seasonally. I mentioned the Soul Rebel bar, the one with the kind of Jamaican jerk spices is kind of a good spring, summertime bar. As I said, if you would like a cold beer, I really like our single origin bars. I mean, that's kind of, as I said, that's sort of where that was our starting point, and the thing that first really got us excited about this idea of making chocolate this way was this idea that, different beans from different regions were going to have these different flavors. That was just a really interesting thing to me. And so our Madagascar bar, as I mentioned, is really fruity, and I kind of like having a piece of that and then having a piece of our Ecuador bar, which is totally different flavor, and you really get it really drives home the point that that these the beans, the trees, the region really have an impact on the flavor of the chocolate. So those off the top of my head, those would be some of my favorites, but it varies depending on the weather outside, time of year.
And so you guys are now entrepreneurs, right? You come back from Costa Rica and you dove right into this business, and it's just obviously the knowledge and the experience you've had, and now in cocoa beans and the trees and the relationships you're building all over the world, but. So you come back, I mean, what were some of the hardest things about opening up your own business?
Well, we didn't have a lot of money when we started. We were, we ran a bunch of credit card debts, which we're still working on, but making progress on. So there's the sort of financial challenge. Banks aren't, really into giving loans to people who are just starting businesses. We were able to get a small business loan from Invest Atlanta, which is kind of a local agency here to help businesses starting off, which was helpful. But it was also, when we started, for some reason, we thought that, Elaine and myself, along with like one staff person, would be enough to do everything. And that included making chocolate and running the kind of front of house, handling, sale, the sales there at the retail shop. And, we really quickly realized that was kind of ridiculous. As I mentioned, our first, especially like the first 6 months, one or both of us were there in the shop until 3 or 4 in the morning, trying to get more bars made. And we still today hand wrap all of the bars that we make, but we have we now have staff that help do all of that. And so there's all of the stress of finances and working crazy hours, combined with the fact that we were a married couple and had 2 kids. It was a stressful first couple of years. And as we've grown and been able to bring on staff to help both with making chocolate and even doing wholesale. We have a sales through shipping. Things have gotten easier over time, but starting a business from scratch like this was definitely a challenge.
And I mean, so you guys both came back. I mean, both of you work for then the business, is that correct? Or did one of you guys go back to work, or both of you sort of dove into this, and this is both, because you mentioned working till 3 a.m. in the morning, so I'm imagining that both of you work on the business.
Yeah, we both have been full-time on the business from the beginning. When we first came back, I mean, I was fortunate. The work that I had done in the past was kind of political campaign work, and I was fortunate that I was able to, when we first came back from Costa Rica, kind of as we were working on the business, I did some part-time consulting work. So we was able to, pay some of the bills as we were getting everything in order. And, there was a long process of, developing our packaging for the bars, working on recipes, doing the build out of our space at Krog, all of that. So we were sort of juggling both of those things, and we had a little bit of income coming in at the time. But we've definitely both been working on it full time since its inception.
And I mean, so this is pretty awesome, right? And you've got the thing going, but I mean, you had to develop your own packaging, and you mentioned wrapping your own bars. So, I mean, where did the ideas come to creativity? And tell us a little bit about that, because now you've got the business, you've got the bars, you've got the idea, you started it, you guys are both working full time, but now you've got to also figure out the packaging, and how to sell it and how to retail it and build a website. I mean, what was all of that like?
Yeah, we knew early on that, our price point for our chocolate was going to be higher than what, most Americans are used to paying for chocolate. I mean, we're totally in line with kind of what people pay for craft chocolate, but most people have still not been exposed to craft bean to bar chocolate. And so we knew that we needed to do a couple of things. One was sort of tell the story of why our chocolate costs more. And so a lot of that was in thinking about our shop, and that was one of the reasons why we wanted to make the chocolate right there in the shop so people could see the process, and our front of house staff does a lot of education on, sort of the stuff that we already talked about, where chocolate comes from, where cacao grows, what the process is. And that's a lot of value add that people start to understand. There's so much more that goes into chocolate than what they realized, and that we're paying more attention to the beans that we get and the quality and what we pay the farmers. And so that is helpful to explain why our chocolate is $9.50 a bar. And then the other piece was our packaging. We really felt like this is probably, for most people, it's not going to be a chocolate they're going to eat every day, and so we wanted the packaging to feel like this is sort of a special thing, and it's a good gift to give. If you're going to a dinner party, you could buy a bottle of wine, or you could also bring a couple of bars of single origin chocolate as well. And so we spent a lot of time really focused on the look of the shop and that, and then also our initial kind of wrappers and the feel of the paper. We worked with a local graphic designer who came up with we worked with on the logo and the kind of illustrations and graphics on the packaging. We also, our name Xocolatl comes from the original kind of Aztec word for how they consume chocolate. It actually means, the choco means bitter, and atl means water. It was bitter water. They didn't have chocolate bars. They would grind cacao down into water and cornmeal, and they would add peppers and spices. And but it was a really important beverage to Aztecs, and cacao beans were used as currency. And so, and then we liked the fact that the ATL was the end of the word. And so we really wanted this idea of kind of bridging this gap between the people who are growing cacao and in Central and South America or Africa or wherever they are in the world, and the work that they're doing in their lives, and then the people here in the U.S. That we would be selling the chocolate to, and wanting to provide them with good, clean, high-quality chocolate, and kind of, we like the idea of these two communities and us kind of being a bridge between the two communities. And so we designed our logo with kind of it's Xocolatl, but we sort of highlight the ATL at the end of the word. And we thought that was, although it's really challenging for everybody to pronounce, we thought it was a good kind of bridge between the two worlds. And so then our packaging design focused, we have kind of our single origin bars that have, the designs on them are very focused on the cacao tree. So they're kind of an abstract drawing of cacao trees. And then our flavor inclusion bars are kind of more focused on community. And so they are these kind of line drawings of the neighborhood that's actually right around us that we kind of live and work in. Actually includes a little drawing of the Krog Street Market warehouse building that we're in. And there's a water tower around the corner and some of the houses in the neighborhood. And so we just spent a lot, it was a 7 or 8 month process to work through the wrapper design, because we felt like that was an important thing. And all the other thing we wanted to do was include a lot of colors in the packaging. A lot of chocolate bars, especially at that time, I think even still it's changed a little bit, but there was a lot of kind of browns and beiges and kind of things. And we really thought one of the things that was cool about cacao that most people don't know is that you have these really beautiful, bright colored pods, and we wanted to kind of bring that color to the packaging. So a lot of our bars are all different colors, but they're really inspired off of colors that actual cacao pods are in the wild. And we also thought that would kind of differentiate us, sitting on a shelf next to other chocolate bars. So there's really a two-pronged approach on the physical, creating a good physical space to be able to educate and tell the story of chocolate and what we were doing, and then focusing on the packaging and being able to both get people's attention but have it be meaningful packaging that people felt like was something special.
And I think it's awesome because I don't think people realize. I mean, even with coffee, people don't realize the actual different climates, the different geographical locations, the different varieties of the coffee plants, but it's just like the same as a cocoa tree. Like there's so many varieties and they grow differently in each climate and soil and all that, and it gives different flavor profiles and texture. So I love the idea of a single origin because it really concentrates on that particular area's flavor. And then the pods being different colors, I didn't know that, but it makes sense how to tie it all together as part of your guys' story. And I think that's just so incredible that you guys are doing it. And the part that I really love is that with this bean to bar movement, as you talked about, there is this caring, like there's starting to happen in coffee. Like they want the farmers to do well. There is too many middlemen. Often the farmer is the one who profits the least but does all the work. There's, being sustainable or better for the land or better for the people that goes along with it, because they're not having to cut as many corners to do it. They're fermenting the beans properly. It's not having to go industrial process like you talked about, which is just so cool. And I think in food and beverages across the world, we're seeing much more of this as more entrepreneurs like yourself get into the business. That streamlining process and making sure that everyone profits is a good thing. I mean, in the United States, it's the same thing. I mean, we have so many middlemen in our food system. Well, one, food is way more expensive than it needs to be. And two is the farmers often make such little money, they have to be subsidized by the government. And so it's not really an efficient system because everyone in the middle marks it up 100%. And they're the ones just passing it through and not really growing it. They touch it the least amount, and the consumer is willing to pay for it because what else are they going to do? But we don't realize how much the middlemen in the system actually mark up the prices, do whatever. And it's exactly what you guys are doing. There should be, to farm to, a middle aggregator where in your case it's fermenting, but the same with food, and then from there to production, and then production directly to the consumer. And in some cases it can go production to market to consumer, but that's still 5 steps it takes. I mean, think about that. That's an efficient system, but yet it still takes 5 steps.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I think the thing that's encouraging, you know, as you mentioned, that there's so much more focus on transparency now, and I feel like it's twofold. It's one on what's in the food and like, is this actually good for me? And then the other is, where did this food come from, and what are the kind of the social and environmental impacts that are, you know, happening because of this product. And you know, that's one of the other things, just to throw out another kind of cool thing about cacao, is that it's you know, a lot, as I said, you know, grown within 20 degrees of the equator, and it's actually one of the guys that we work with in South America. He's really driven to work on it because it's as like a rainforest preservation tool. Because what you'll find, you'll go down on Amazon, the place in Peru that we buy beans from is kind of the upper Amazon basin area, and you'll see rainforest that's been clear cut for pineapple or banana or palm oil. And cacao actually grows best under a canopy. And so you're not maintaining, you know, virgin rainforest, but you are maintaining other trees other than just cacao. And then the cacao itself is providing a lot more foliage and cover for and habitat for birds and for other animals than something like pineapple. And, you know, whereas pineapple, they basically have to go and clear cut, plant pineapple, and then the soil is completely exhausted after 3 years, and they go and clear cut another area and plant more pineapple. Cacao is a much more sustainable, environmentally friendly agricultural product than a lot of the other stuff that happens. And one of the other big things actually in the rainforest in the Amazon is clear cutting for ranching as well. So, you know, if we can pay farmers more for their beans and give them more incentive to grow cacao versus some of these other crops, then it can actually end up being a useful rainforest preservation tool as well.
Yeah, and I love that. And actually, when I went to graduate school at the University of North Carolina in this program called the One MBA, and we had a partner school. It was a collaborative of 5 universities to do this One MBA program. Now it's actually University of Miami instead of University of North Carolina. That's the North American partner. But we were in Brazil, and one of the things that is going on down there is how to keep the rainforest from being plowed down at the rate that it's basically being plowed down and turned into farmland, like you said, or ranch land. And how do you have products that are in there? And one of the companies we work with, they were trying to figure out how to make sure that they put in products and had things growing in the rainforest that one complemented the rainforest, but they were turning it into makeup and cosmetics, all natural makeup and cosmetics. Yeah. But you're talking about the same thing, is how do we actually work with the land, and how do we actually work with the forest and preserve it and keep Mother Nature's cycle intact and still make it profitable for everyone. And I think that that's one of the most amazing things that we're seeing, and that's the only way to sort of reverse this agricultural industry, because we turned agriculture into an industrial business, and it's not meant to be that way. And I know I have to procure hundreds of thousands of pounds of food in our business. I don't do it personally, but we as a business do it. And to get that amount of food, there has to be a farmer growing all of it. But what we're finding is that when a farmer does full circle farming, you know, where the cattle are, and when we talk about one in the episodes recently, is that the hooves help push the ground down and help fertilize it and mush things around and aerate it. And that when they naturally graze on it, they're fertilizing it. And if it's the cows that go first, and then you have the chickens that sort of eat off of that and then put the nitrogen in the soil, and then the pigs that also come through and eat basically what everything else doesn't want to eat, but also they have a different type of hoof that also pushes the nitrogen and other things into the soil as they're doing that. there's this natural cycle that things can grow. And it's the same thing with the rainforest. I mean, you want to keep the rainforest intact because there's so many things that grow in there, so many benefits, from medicinal to, like you said, to chocolate, the cocoa tree, and the birds and the things like that, as well as obviously one of the largest producers of oxygen and removers of carbon dioxide from the environment is the rainforest in South America. So I really think that as entrepreneurs, seeing that big picture, it's so important. And the story that you guys are telling, I love it, because what you're doing is not only profitable, it's something that you're doing for a business, and you're creating jobs and obviously putting a roof over your head and all the right things in that way. You're actually becoming stewards of the world and stewards of humanity, as we talk about sometimes on this podcast, is like, how do we actually better the world as entrepreneurs, and do we have the opportunity? And this one sort of, for lack of a better term, fell in your lap, and you're kind of accidental entrepreneurs, as we call them, but it's not like you haven't had a lot of hard work to get where you are. I don't want people to get confused that there's any overnight successes, but in doing what you're doing, you guys have been granted this ability to help the planet and help other human beings around the world, which I think is so cool.
Well, thank you. That was really one of the things that attracted us to getting the chocolate. I mean, beyond the fact that we were sort of excited about single origin bars and things, but, from both my background and Elaine's background professionally before, as I said, I've been doing some progressive political work, and she had been doing international aid and relief work. And we started to see all of the connections that you just said. And we kind of started to see all of those, how they revolved around chocolate and sourcing cacao and everything. And so that was one of the things that got us excited about, starting this business. We felt like there was an opportunity to, kind of have some impact on whatever small scale it is in all of the kind of the areas that you just mentioned.
And I mean, do you guys, is it always been a goal of yours to sort of give back? And I mean, you have kids, so I mean, I'm going to ask a very large question, so that's probably a moving target, but there's the whole, you're giving back as an entrepreneur through being profitable as a business and trying to aim to be profitable and grow business. You're giving back to the world, but in that sense, you're making the world a better place for your kids, but you're also creating a business for your kids that they can potentially be involved in as time goes on. I mean, so how do you manage all of that, really? I mean, you have family time and it's like, okay, so, but you're doing this great thing.
Yeah. I mean, we, as I mentioned, it's gotten a little easier in the last, say 2 years, especially the first year or two, really the first 2 years were I think really difficult. Really, I mean, just to be frank, I mean, it was challenging on our marriage. It was challenging on, our physical health, just across the board. I mean, and, as we have, as our revenue has grown, we've been able to, have more people help us. That has definitely, made a difference in the quality of life and being able to be present with our kids and not just physically, but, mentally, emotionally present. And so, that's been really important for us. And, we don't, we've never really set out to create a business to pass on to them, because we want them to have the freedom to choose what they want to do. If they decide, hey, I'm really passionate about this and this is what I want to do, then that's fine. But, I think the other thing that's been important to us is, this idea of sort of, as I mentioned, community in the places where the cacao is growing, and then community here in Atlanta. And we've really been focused on wanting to get the business to a place where we're able to, we've always had the goal of treating our employees here, being as conscious, as we are about buying the cacao, having that same attitude with our staff here in Atlanta. And so actually we're really excited this year. We were able to, we're only 4.5 years old, and we were able to roll out a health insurance plan to our staff here. We're able to cover 50% of their health insurance. We've got been able to set up paid days off for staff, and we really we want to sort of add to. We want our staff here to be able to afford to live in the city, which is more expensive than outside the perimeter here in Atlanta, and to be able to have a quality of life, and so we're long term we're focused on wanting to be able to kind of continue to hopefully add benefits and things to our staff plan here, and really have a holistic approach to the business, in how we kind of treat just everybody, from our customers to our staff to the people that we're buying beans from. We also, where we're buying our supplies, our packaging, and things like that. Actually, one of the really cool things, we just switched our paper over for our wrappers to a French paper company. That's the name of the company. I think it's actually based in Michigan. It's called French Paper Company, and it's an old family paper mill that been running off of hydroelectric power, their own hydroelectric generator since for like 85 years or something like that. They actually produce so much power that they're 100% provide enough power for 100% of their factory, and then even feed power back into the grid to help power the town near the paper mill. And it's 100% recycled paper and sustainable. And so, we try to just think about the whole business as we kind of left this world of politics and aid and relief work, but we wanted to use the business kind of as a tool to do some of the things that we were working on in kind of a policy or kind of NGO type of way before, and now kind of try to do some of those things through the business that we're building. So that's kind of the thing that keeps us really, kind of inspired and fired up about kind of our day-to-day, work.
And I love that as well, because I think, and Deborah and I were big donators and we donate money, but one of the things that as entrepreneurs I think is the most important, and it's something I realized being in grad school and traveling all over the world and watching businesses and everything, like it's one thing, and I'm going to use the mosquito net example because I always use it, but it's one thing to manufacture mosquito nets here and then ship it over to, say, Africa or South America, but it's another thing to give them the ability to manufacture their own mosquito nets and create an economy so they can sustain themselves. And obviously you can still profit from it if you teach them how to do it and take a piece of the business, but also give them ownership. And that's basically what you're doing, is you're giving these farmers ownership, not directly through stock, but in your business, because they're growing the cacao pods and beans for you guys that you turn into chocolate. But in a way, they're all stakeholders in your business, and they're getting the benefit of owning their own businesses and creating their own economies there, which really is a huge benefit to them economically in their communities, and helps sort of start raising, these third world countries, I should say, I guess that's still probably the proper term, into starting to move into a more modern nation through creating these economies, because the farmer needs support. He's going to need an accountant, and he supplies with a broker or supports a co-op, as you said, and they need employees, and it starts creating all this jobs. So us buying chocolate from you creates this downward trend where there's this group of stakeholders, because you're a small business and care about where the beans are coming from. It's actually really creating this lineage all the way down to the farmer of better practices and better economic development, as well as building economies in their communities, which is just really amazing, and it's the whole thing. They don't need retirement plans. They need businesses and entrepreneurism and things there. And don't get me wrong, I think we need to help, and NGOs are an important part of the system. But I think one of the coolest things you guys are doing is really creating businesses in these communities through what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, until we create some sort of new worldwide economic system, there's, I think Elaine and I both felt like the world was not on a sustainable course, and I don't think that we're the solution to that necessarily, but we're at least, I think we have all got to be conscious of and aware of, the social, environmental, impact of what we're doing. And so we've really, this is kind of the way that we've figured out to try to do our part, and to, that is at least kind of gratifying to us, and makes us, sleep a little better at night. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's no different than small businesses in America actually create most of the jobs and employ most of the people in the world. We see big numbers for big corporations, but that's not where most of the employment is. And it's the same thing here. It's a lot of people and small businesses need to make the same decisions you're making, even if it's just, procuring locally. And for cocoa, obviously, it's not something that can be procured locally because we can't grow cocoa trees in the United States that I know of. I mean, maybe there's a way to do it in greenhouses and things like that. I'm not sure, aquaponics and hydroponics, but I can't imagine it be efficient as it is in Central and South America. And
so, there are some cacao trees in Hawaii, and then there are a few in like South Florida, but not enough to actually produce anything. I actually have about 10 trees growing in our office here, from beans that we've brought back from our trips to Peru and Nicaragua, in particular, and Costa Rica. And they can't be outside during winter. We're fortunate to have some really big windows, and so they're able to kind of grow here in the wintertime, or at least sort of not die in the wintertime, and then they kind of grow a little bit in spring and summertime. But yeah, this is there's nowhere really outside of Hawaii in the U.S. that produces any cacao crop.
Amazing. It's awesome. And I think, maybe there's an entrepreneur out there somewhere that'll figure out how to grow them indoors on a larger rate. So, I mean, do you know off the top of your head how much chocolate, I guess let's go all the way to the end, comes off of one tree? I mean, is it like a pound? I mean, once you get all the beans off a tree, roast them, or ferment them, roast them, turn them into chocolate. I mean, how much actually does one tree produce?
There's not really any super good measurement for that. The thing that folks will say that's just a really rough approximation is that like one pod, I mean, these are pretty big pods. If you, as I mentioned, if you or your audience want to, Google cacao pod or cacao tree images, but one pod can produce enough seeds to make one bar of chocolate. And a tree will produce, that can also vary how many pods will produce on a tree. But it takes farmers. The way that it works, though, as I mentioned, is you sort of have to reach a critical mass of pods and seeds and pulp to be able to do a good fermentation process. And so even if you produce a couple of pods, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to make it into a chocolate bar. You've got to really reach like a quarter ton or so to kind of fill one fermentation box, and so to be able to do a good ferment. So it's definitely not an easy process.
It's pretty cool. So would you say that your motivation and inspiration then goes back to your guys' roots before you started the business and the NGOs and what you were doing in politics and things like that, and trying to change and make a difference? Or is it, I mean, what really motivates and inspires you guys every day, you and Elaine?
Yeah, I think it's definitely that. I mean, we did want to, work for ourselves and create our own thing. And, I think we both, like the idea of building something and creating something. And Elaine can be very focused on projects, like start a project and kind of see it to completion. And I really like, kind of starting things from scratch and having kind of my brain will just start going in all sorts of different directions of things that, things we could do and directions we could go. And so I think that was like, that was appealing to us, being able to kind of follow our own path and sort of go where our, sort of inspiration took us. Also, as you mentioned, being able to have kind of that social, impact with something, coming from our previous work. So I think, and then actually, honestly, the third thing was just the idea of, Elaine had done Peace Corps after college in Africa and Malawi, and, I did study abroad in East Africa, and we traveled together in Central America. And just the idea of having a job where we could travel the world to different places, to meet farmers in random locations, even that, was appealing. So it's kind of, all three of those things that played a role in it.
I mean, that's such a cool part of it, right? Is you're getting to meet all these people around the world and travel to all these different places, but also make a difference doing it. I mean, Deborah and I travel quite a bit, and obviously we travel for work and make differences and create jobs and try to do exactly what you're doing, just on a different scale. We're trying to just do it in the United States, is create that more sustainable market where we deal directly with the farmers, procure directly from them, so there's less middlemen, so the farmers make more money, we make more money, and then the consumer pays less. And so, and trying to streamline that process and make it more efficient. And actually, in the United States, we throw away a lot of food, we plow a lot under in the fields, as well as let a lot rot in the supermarket. So had to make that more efficient and things like that, and grow more varieties, and where we aren't throwing them away and things like that, and how to deal with that problem, particularly there in Georgia. But one of the coolest things that's happening is you guys get to travel and do it all over the world. And where we travel, when we go around the world, it's usually for fun, which is not a bad thing, but to be able to sort of interlock all of it and have an excuse to go and a reason to go is just such a cool thing, not to mention the relationships you're building and people that you're meeting all over the world. I mean, that's got to be an incredible experience.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun. I mean, it's very different from, we'll go on a family trip somewhere, and when you're sort of going on vacation or the tourist, which I love, it's great, but it's a cool experience to go somewhere and you end up in a random town that you would never otherwise visit, but you're going there with a purpose, and you're actually involved in kind of people's lives there in a way that you don't get that opportunity when you're traveling purely for fun. And so that's an exciting fun thing for us to do.
And so as we begin to wrap things up, Matt, if, what are some of the things, I mean, you guys weren't entrepreneurs before, but what are some of the things you've learned now that, I wouldn't say you wish you knew before, because then you wouldn't have learned them and be where you are, but in a way, if you could tell someone else some lessons that you've learned, or go back and tell you some things that you feel that you could have, wish you would have known then, what would they be as a business owner and entrepreneur?
Oh, that's tough. As you mentioned, I kind of think everybody has their own path to this, and so I don't think there's necessarily a right or a wrong path. I mean, there's a part of me that would say, I wish, we had started earlier, when we were younger and didn't have kids. It probably would have, there are probably things that would have been easier. But then on the flip side, when we started, Elaine and I both had a lot of professional experience. And so we brought skills to the table that we wouldn't have had, if we'd started when we were 25 or something like that. I don't know that there's a right path other than, trying. and I do think the one thing we've done right is we really commit to something when we decide it's what we want to do. And so we sort of, once we were like, this is what we want to do, we want to start the chocolate company, it was 100% that's what we were going to do. We didn't really leave ourselves any wiggle room at all. We signed our lease at Krog Street Market before we had ever sold a chocolate bar to anybody. We were making bars at home for family and friends, but we didn't have packaging, we didn't have anything. And so we really had, we were locked in, both financially and mentally and everything else, and really kind of committed 100% to it. And so I think for us, I think that was the key. Whatever we lacked in knowledge or experience in other areas was, we just made up for by committing and then working really hard. And we got lucky. I mean, the other thing is, it also takes, luck and help from, family and friends. We had people help us, when we first started, we were doing some farmers markets before we had actually opened our shop, and our first farmers market, we had friends over, were helping us, wrap bars at 2:00 in the morning before the market, and you've got to have that kind of support network definitely helps. So
yeah, I think that having support.
I guess the last thing I would add to that is you also have to ask for help. I mean, you really, I think a lot of times people are hesitant to ask, and we definitely ask people to help, and people are happy. Generally, people are happy to help you, this is, I think starting a business, at least for us, was not something we would have been able to have just done, purely on our own without help from family and friends.
Yeah, I don't think many people, I think that's one of the things people struggle with, is asking for help or asking for mentorship or being vulnerable enough to say that I'm not succeeding at this. How can I get some help from someone? I mean, I definitely did it earlier on in my entrepreneurial experience. I wanted to do it all myself, and it took me a long time before I realized just ask someone. Just ask someone for help. People are willing to do it. People are willing to mentor you, but I mean, sometimes you have to do the work. You have to be the willing to want to be vulnerable and ask the questions and admit you don't know and admit that, that you need help. I mean, that's the hardest part, right? Yeah. Is being that vulnerable position. But people love doing it and being involved in part of a community or helping people grow. And I mean, it's exactly what you're doing with the farmers and all the countries that you're involved in for the cocoa trees is, I mean, you're helping them and you're helping them grow and become, better entrepreneurs themselves and better farmers and things like that. So I think that's really cool. And I think on a full circle that even as the entrepreneur that's helping things go downstream, we have to be willing to go upstream as well to get advice and help and, whatever it is that we need from someone else that may help us in our future.
Yeah.
So Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast, and what you guys are doing is great. And I look forward, if you guys are willing to have you back on in 10 to 12 months and continue to tell your story and your journey and maybe dive more into your adventures across the world with going to see the cocoa trees and things like that. Cause I'd really think we could just do a podcast episode on that alone and about the farmers and really dive into some of that. So just give you some literally food for thought about maybe doing a second episode here in 10 to 12 months, because I want to continue to tell your story and promote you guys, but I'd really love to dive into your relationships and your travels around the world with the cocoa trees and the cocoa farmers.
Yeah, that sounds great, and maybe we can get Elaine on next time. She can be more eloquent than me, so.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to continue to do this with you guys and promote you guys. And I really love what you're doing. So if I can help promote the business and the better farming and what you guys are doing and helping your own employees and creating jobs and businesses and propel your businesses through the podcast, I'm all for that, because I think what you guys are doing for the food world and for jobs and economies around the world is important. And while one company can't make a difference, telling your story and getting other people to do similar things, I think, can make a difference. So thank you again.
Well, thanks for having us on. I appreciate it.
And if everyone likes what's going on here, first off, I want to thank everyone in the audience for listening in. We're in 42 countries around the world right now. we have tens of thousands of downloads, and it continues to grow every day, and we continue to go into more and more countries every day, which is pretty awesome. I didn't know something like this could do that and touch so many people's lives around the world, and so many people were interested in the stories of food, beverage, and nutrition entrepreneurs and wanting to be entrepreneurs themselves. And a lot of people didn't want to be alone. I mean, they don't want to be alone in their journey, and hearing that you're not alone, that there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there that are going through similar struggles or trying to build businesses or trying to grow their business, or like in this case, making a difference in the world through their entrepreneurial endeavors. You know, it can work, and people do succeed, and it just takes the willingness to do so. So thank you for everyone who's listening in and supporting it and passing it on and sharing it. If you want to be on the podcast, you can reach out to me. It's justin@thefoodentrepreneurs.com. And you can reach out to us on Instagram and Facebook at Justin and the Food Entrepreneurs. Thank you for everyone for listening in, and have a great day.